Criticisms of the 8 years of the Bush administration certainly laced throughout that speech.
He says, as for our common defense, we reject as false the choice between our safety and our ideals.
But you remember he also reiterated the Constitution, where he said, the God-given promise, all are equal, all are free, all deserve a chance to pursue their full measure of happiness. And through this campaign, he has come back to the constitutional right is for everybody.
Let's watch. George Bush Sr. is already on board that chopper, so is Barbara Bush.
They'll be taking that Executive One U.S. Marine Corps helicopter. It's no longer called Marine One because it's only Marine One once the President of the United States is flying aboard that helicopter, and he is now the former President of the United States. They'll take it for a short ride, about 10 minutes or so, to Andrews Air Force Base, where they will board that huge 747, the one that we know as Air Force One. It won't be called Air Force One once again because that plane carrying him back to Texas will not carry the president, only the former president of the United States. And as David Gergen points out, a very gracious moment by Michelle and Barack Obama, the president and first lady of the United States, as they meet up with Jill Biden and Joe Biden, the vice president of the United States. They will apparently wait to see that Executive One U.S. Marine Corps helicopter take off, head out to Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland for the journey back to Texas. It's all laced with enormous symbolism.
This Capitol, this White House, it is now theirs.
Yep. And he takes off this...
And that helicopter.
And when he's on the helicopter, it'll be Marine One.
I'm not sure if he asked the pilot how long he'll be because he wants it back soon.
By the way, as you know, David, it's not just that one helicopter. He has a whole fleet of U.S. Marine Corps helicopters. Whenever he wants to go to Camp David or any place else within helicopter range, he's got that helicopter. Then he's got that huge 747 Air Force One at his disposal as well.
I can only imagine what is going through former President Bush's mind as he sees Barack Obama, a man who, you think about it, 2-3 years ago, relatively unknown. I mean, the thought that he could become president, very few people would have said this would happen.
Very few people thought. George W. Bush thought that Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee. And this is a tough moment for him, as he told us in his many goodbye interviews that while it's been a tough job for him, he loved every minute of it, he said. And
it's interesting, they're about a half an hour behind the schedule that they had organized, but does it really make any difference, David Gergen? I don't think so. I think everybody is having a good time. They're watching the celebration. It's a day for history to unfold. Tomorrow, the President of the United States gets down to real business. He's got a series of meetings, as we know, and the enormous challenges facing him and the country on the foreign policy, national security front, and also on the economic front.
Yes, he
You can
does.
actually see the chopper now lifting off past the Capitol from our vantage point. You can see it.
But by all indications, he relishes the chance to go into the Oval Office and get started. He wants to get moving.
Yeah, he'll have lunch up on Capitol Hill, and then he'll make that drive over to the White House. And you know what? Pretty soon he'll be in the Oval Office himself. He'll be signing papers, executive orders, making major decisions. Isn't that a great shot, Anderson?
They're about to pass us right by, actually. This is...
Yeah, it's heading our way a little bit. I guess he's going to make a little tour. Maybe he'll fly over the White House before he heads out to Andrews Air Force Base, which is actually the other way, the other side of Capitol Hill. But I guess it would be symbolic and appropriate to fly over the north lawn, the south lawn of the White House.
It's interesting. All along the parade route, you see people turning and waving to the helicopter as it passes overhead.
as Barack Obama said in his speech, he said this is a moment that will define a generation.
Yes.
think it will.
But notice in the speech, too, he also went back to the other moments that define our times. Hurricane Katrina. He talked about 9/11, those emotional touchstones for people. He weaved them through the speech as well because he was throwing it back to the American people. Again, that line he always says, not about me, it's about you. And what we remember most about those moments is the spirit of the American people.
And as we see this U.S. Marine Corps helicopter carrying the former President George Bush and the former First Lady Laura Bush off to Andrews Air Force Base to board a 747 U.S. Air Force aircraft to fly him back to Texas. I want to point out, and David, Gloria, Soledad, and Anderson, there was a mixed message, a double message he sent to the rest of the world. And viewers are watching in huge numbers. Hundreds of millions of people all over the world. Our broadcast on CNN and CNN International is being seen right now in 240 countries. And I like to think, Anderson, we've played a little bit of a role just broadcasting this to the world out there.
It's amazing to see in Times Square, in Harlem, in California, all throughout the United States, these jumbotrons which we've set up, people watching on CNN. In Times Square we had seemed to, in the shot that we saw, just be filled with people, seemed to have stopped.
They stopped. I mean,
I think people were stopping. There was a hush all over the country, indeed much of the world at that moment when he was sworn in, and then certainly during his speech. I was going to make the point that to the rest of the world, especially to the Muslim world, he had a double message. He said this, he said, for those who seek to advance their aims by inducing terror and slaughtering innocents, we say to you now that our spirit is stronger and cannot be broken. You cannot outlast us, and we will defeat you. But then a couple lines later, he said this, to the Muslim world, we seek a new way forward based on mutual interest and mutual respect. I think that message, David, was a powerful message to send on this critically important day.
Yes, and it's interesting. I do think there was a hard edge, as Bill Bennett said, to some of this speech. But there was also a different message, one that's very different from what we've been hearing from George W. Bush. And that is a very strong message. And I thought some of the most important words in the speech were to the message he wanted to send that America is a friend of each nation and every man, woman, and child who seeks a future of peace and dignity. And we are ready to lead once more. Those are the words that the world has been waiting to hear. They want to see America lead, but they want to see us lead in a different way than what we've been doing. And I think what he was saying is very different. The second inaugural of George W. Bush just 4 years ago was entirely, the theme was a crusade for democracy, to remake the world as democratic nations. There is not a word in here about trying to remake the world. It is rather peace and dignity. That's what we're seeking with other nations. That's a very big departure from what we've had.
That was the toughest part for George W. Bush to hear, because the words, we are ready to lead once more, implies that to George W. Bush that we haven't been leading in the right way.
I thought the speech had something for everyone, if you will, in terms of he spoke of the slaves, he spoke of rescuers, he spoke of the military. I mean, there was a moment, if anybody was listening closely to the speech, where they heard their name mentioned, essentially.
He wrapped himself not only in the civil rights history, but in all of American history.
Absolutely, and then to take it internationally as well, your struggle and our struggle, we understand. It was like he was speaking individually to people in this speech.
It was a new face for America to the world.
We should point out, while President Obama and Vice President Biden, still getting used to saying that exactly correctly, and their wives are having lunch on Capitol Hill, a number of their aides are already starting to work. Ed Henry is on Capitol Hill. Ed, what are you hearing?
Well, Anderson, what's interesting is right after Barack Obama was sworn in as the 44th president and was about to begin his inaugural address, I noticed some Obama people starting to leave shortly thereafter. Greg Craig, the White House counsel, the new White House chief lawyer, among the people who are leaving. Jim Messina, a deputy White House chief of staff. The reason they were leaving, there were vans here outside the Capitol to bring them over to the White House to get them started. There were about 20 or 30 Obama aides who have already been cleared in, already got their paperwork through. They're trying to finish the paperwork on other people to get to work, as David Gergen was saying, to start tackling some of these challenges. And I spoke to John Podesta, who has been co-chair of this transition, but will not be in the White House. He was in the Clinton White House in 1993. He said he jumped into one of these vans in 1993 while Bill Clinton was giving his inaugural address. And when he got to the White House, they were still taking the old drapes down. They had not even completed all of the work. And that's how quick this transition of power is. One other thing I noticed as well is John McCain was right down here. The governors were in front of me, the senators a little further, and the senators were right behind where Barack Barack Obama was delivering the inaugural address. Fascinating to watch John McCain watching closely every single word. And there was even a part of the inaugural address about serving a cause greater than your own good. That's a line almost borrowed from John McCain, something he talked a lot about on the campaign trail. But you'll notice Barack Obama did not mention John McCain in this speech. He did mention, though, George W. Bush and thank him for his service to the country. Anderson.
President Obama is signing a document that will declare today a day of national renewal.
Flanked by the leadership of the United States Congress. Let's listen in.
I was told not to swipe the pen. Which I often do. I have two more. That's true. I guess I had to have a cabinet. Yeah, I forgot about that.
These are his official nominee. These are his official nomination documents for his members of his new cabinet. All of these must be signed in order for the process to move forward.
And if you've ever seen Barack Obama's signature, he is very precise when he writes, and if he writes, he scribbles some words before he signs an autograph, for example. His penmanship, I must say, and I've seen it, is really excellent.
Yes, he's got a little flourish to that.
Yeah, it's got a great
that
flourish,
signature.
and it's very impressive.
I think we still have Ed Henry on Capitol Hill. Ed, what do we know about the days ahead in terms of action Barack Obama plans to take through executive orders or otherwise?
Well, it's very interesting, Anderson. I can tell you that one of the things that he's considering doing today, if not tomorrow, is getting involved in the Mideast crisis. I can tell you that there have been some aides telling me that they were a little concerned about him getting so quickly involved in the Mideast crisis, but I'm told that privately Barack Obama himself has been pushing to get involved, and how he'll do it is to name at least one special envoy to deal with this crisis as early as today, not just what's happening in Gaza and what has been happening, but the broader Mideast conflict, the lack of peace for many, many years. Also tomorrow, he's having two big meetings. He's bringing in his senior economic advisors to talk about trying to drum up support for his massive economic recovery plan that's now eclipsed $800 billion in price. But he's also bringing in military leaders, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he's going to give them a new mission. What he talked about on the campaign, start withdrawing all U.S. combat troops from Iraq within 16 months. What he's doing there clearly is sending a signal to his liberal supporters. They've been nervous that he might not fulfill that campaign promise, and he's sending a signal that he's going to start moving towards that promise. But we have to point out that doesn't mean that he's actually fulfilling the promise yet. It's a long way to go. Remember, he has a Republican Defense Secretary, Robert Gates, from the Bush administration, who's staying on. If 6 months down the road he suggested it would not be wise to continue pulling out all combat troops, it's going to be a very tough call for Barack Obama whether he continues the campaign promise or adjust. It's something that is going to be interesting to play out. The final thing to point out, a whole slew of executive orders that could be coming, among them closing down the U.S. military prison at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. That would fit right into what he was saying in the inaugural address, essentially about reaching out around the world, trying to change America's image around the world, Anderson.
Roland Martin and John Roberts had a very up-close seat over there on Capitol Hill. Let's go to them. Roland, your thoughts upon watching this remarkable transfer?
Well, first of all, it was interesting watching all of the different folks who were down here as they were taking photos. I mean, we could see, John and I could see, you know, Oprah Winfrey and Smokey Robinson and Puff Daddy. But, you know, one of the folks who I was really looking at was Congressman John Lewis.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and watching him, and in fact, when President-elect Obama came out and he saw him, he gave him a hug, and you can see Lewis whispering something in his ear. And then when he turned to the other side, he also touched the next generation, if you will, Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. And so the emotions were amazing down here because people saw what many folks thought could never happen.
And we talked to Congressman Lewis about that this morning. You know, famous civil rights leader. He was one of the ones that was in the struggles in the South. And he suggested that while this is not the fulfillment Dr. Martin Luther King's dream. He says it certainly is a good long step along the way. And it was just so amazing to see that when Barack Obama was giving his acceptance speech and actually, taking the oath of office, he was 2 miles away from where 45 years ago Dr. Martin Luther King gave that speech. But this is my third one, pretty much from this vantage point. I was actually on the platform for George Bush in 2000 and 2004. And while there's, a sense of pageantry and the honoring of tradition of handing over power between the presidents, the peaceful transition of power, there was something different about this one, something incredibly different. And in the same way that when President Bush said goodbye to President Clinton, there was a cloud that was hanging over the presidency because it was decided by the Supreme Court. But this time, Barack Obama, a clear victory, a clear mandate from the American people to take this country in a different direction. And you got that sense that there was a pivot. Every once in a while in American history, there is a pivot point, and this was one of those points, Roland.
And also, it was the listening to his speech, there was a certain amount of conviction in his voice. Very short speech, but when he made that point about leading, and in essence, how we're going to change in terms of our leadership, I sort of felt that was a little punch, if you will, to the president sitting just over his shoulder. But then also, when he made it clear that if anything happens, that we are going to defend this country, that's when President Bush stood up.
And Vice President Cheney stood up as well. As bad as his back is, he stood up for that one. But clearly he was sending a message that there's a new leader in town, and a leader who is going to...
A new leader in town, not a new sheriff in town.
No, not a new sheriff. No, a new leader in town. That's why I carefully avoided the word sheriff. A new leader in town who is going to govern in a different way than the leader who was in charge of this country for the past 8 years. And you saw that sense through the audience as well, as the helicopter lifted off and climbed over the Capitol building and then headed down Pennsylvania Avenue, final fly over the White House, and then out over the Potomac for a left-hand turn and down to Andrews Air Force Base. People were waving at that helicopter, and they weren't saying goodbye. They were saying, see ya.
Right.
And so, the palpable sense in the crowd that one administration that they weren't really appreciative of was over, and a new one was coming in.
Real quick, a lot of folks spent a lot of time on Pastor Rick Warren and the whole issue. When he came out, there were not many folks clapping when his name was announced. There were very few people who clapped.
But what a moving experience it was to be here, Wolf, and certainly one for the ages.
You're absolutely right. They're now going into Statuary Hall, where President Obama, Vice President Biden, their families will attend a luncheon that's being hosted by the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies. We have the menu. There are about 200 guests who've been invited to this luncheon. You see two of them right there. You just saw John McCain and Al Gore. We'll tell you what's on the menu. We'll tell you what's going on. We've got a lot more.
Lincoln-inspired menu.
I would.
That's what they're saying.
Once you hear this three-course meal, what it's all about, I think you'll be fascinated if you like food, as all of us do. There's Al Gore once again, and John McCain. They're having a little chat. Tipper Gore and Cindy McCain is there as well.
A lot ahead, though, to stick around for. We have the entire inaugural parade, which will be quite something. 13,000 people, groups from 90 different groups from all around the country. A lot to stick around for.
All right, we'll take a quick break. Our extensive coverage of the inauguration of now President Barack Obama will continue right after this.
Coverage of the inauguration of Barack Obama is sponsored by ExxonMobil, taking on the world's toughest energy challenges. Go to CNN.com/44th President to watch highlights from the day's events and send in iReports to share your thoughts on this historic inauguration.
Well, it might surprise a lot of people that ExxonMobil would be interested in lithium-ion battery technology applied to hybrid electric vehicles. Our new battery separator film is a true breakthrough that's going to enable the deployment of more hybrid vehicles faster. This means a tremendous reduction in greenhouse gases, the equivalent of removing millions of cars from the road. I think this is the most important project that I've worked on in my career.
All right, class, let's button it. Becker.
Here.
Callahan. Callahan. Delivery confirmation on Callahan.
Drop them off at 8:15.
Gymnasium.
No, sir. No Callahan.
Always.
No Callahan. Just a freshman.
Thank you.
No emails from his parents. Drivers, I need a 20 on Callahan. Got him. Reroute him straight to detention.
Get more done now with the new BlackBerry Curve, the only BlackBerry Curve with Nextel Direct Connect.
Try to put us to down. Just because we get around. Trying to cause a big sensation. Just talking about my generation. My generation. This is my generation, baby.
Looks like our economy doesn't just need a tune-up. It needs a whole new engine. That's why I like this Repower America deal. New investments to create high-paying jobs and no more being suckered by the big oil and coal companies. 100% clean electricity to power our homes, our offices, and yeah, even our cars. It's time to take charge of our future. That's what America's all about, right? Repower America. It's time to get real.
Every year, there is one performance that must not be missed.
Takes backbone to lead the life you want.
I know. Kate Winslet gives the performance of her life in the role of a lifetime. She's breathtaking. And now, the actress of her generation is the winner of the Golden Globe for Best Actress of the Year. In the film critics rave is a masterpiece.
This is our one chance.
Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet. Revolutionary Road, rated R.
I'm there. The world changing right before my eyes. Not just witnessing the impossible, but living it. Watching it all fall apart one day, then pull itself together the next. Crying, laughing, wondering, believing. Hopeful and always grateful to know I'm not alone.
Welcome back. They're getting ready for lunch over on Capitol Hill. It's a pretty exclusive list, about 200 guests. They're having lunch in the Statuary Hall on Capitol Hill. You see Hillary Clinton, soon to become Secretary of State. Hillary Clinton, still United States Senator. Hillary Clinton, Al Gore, the former Vice President, right in the front of your screen. Barack Obama, Michelle Obama will be coming in. This is Executive One, this U.S. Marine Corps helicopter just touching down at Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington, D.C. Didn't take very long for the former President George Bush and Laura Bush and his parents, the former President George H.W. Bush and Barbara Bush, to make that little journey over to Andrews Air Force Base before they board a plane to fly out to Texas. It's one of those big 747s, normally called Air Force One. It won't be called Air Force One on this trip because the President of the United States isn't aboard. They're going to go inside and have a little ceremony thanking Colonel Tillman, who was the longtime pilot of Air Force One, Colonel Mark Tillman. He retires today. He'll fly the former president back to Texas, and that will be his last mission as the chief pilot of Air Force One, Colonel Mark Tillman. We wish him good luck. There's Senator Inouye of Hawaii, one of the most distinguished members, long-serving senators here on Capitol Hill, among the distinguished guests. Dana Bash is right outside there. She's in the rotunda on Capitol Hill. Dana, this luncheon, we see Ted Kennedy there, among others. Wouldn't you have liked to have been invited to this luncheon? But you're outside. Tell us a little bit about what we know.
It would be wonderful to be invited into that luncheon, no question. We know, well, first of all, I can tell you that I am in the rotunda of the Capitol, which is adjacent to Statuary Hall, where that lunch is taking place, and we're actually waiting. You might see a shot of our camera at the door. We're waiting for Barack Obama to make his way from the Senate, the President's room, which we had just seen, and him signing his papers, make his way from there through the Capitol into Statuary Hall for that lunch. And, you know, Statuary Hall is, I actually peeked my head in there. I'm not allowed into that lunch, but I peeked my head in before it began, and it was a beautiful setup with, you know, beautiful roses vases for the centerpieces, and it was a reminder of just the history of this building. That was actually the House chamber during the 1800s, from 1819 to 1857, and they moved out of there when they have the chamber that they're currently in, and they did their voting in there. But now it is obviously a ceremonial room and a room with fantastic art. And you know, the idea of this kind of lunch is relatively new. This idea of a lunch has really only happened, I think, since 1981, having this kind of big lunch with the new president and members of Congress and members of his team is sort of a nice idea, I think, from the perspective of those here in Congress, because they can toast the new president before he goes down to the other end of Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania Avenue, and they really start doing the business here. Now, I just want to tell you one other thing as we're waiting. There was kind of a moment, and you have a lot of those, as you know, in covering Capitol Hill. We had a moment where John Cornyn, the Republican senator of Texas, pulled aside Hillary Clinton, and they had about a 5-minute conversation. I wish I could read lips in watching that conversation from across the rotunda, because John Cornyn has objected to the idea of making Hillary Clinton the Secretary of State and confirming that nomination today. My sense is that he probably said to her something along the lines of what he said to me today, which is that he has concerns about the funding and the donations to her husband, President Clinton's foundation, and that he wants a little bit of debate and a full Senate vote, and that he is just trying to kind of make a point, and that he doesn't think that this will imperil her nomination at all. But we're going to try to talk to Senator Cornyn to find out what that conversation was all about, because it was a moment that we saw, and it was certainly captured by the cameras before they went into this lunch in Statuary Hall. Wolf.
Dana, stand by. I want to tell our viewers what we know about this lunch. About 200 guests have been invited. The President, Barack Obama, will make remarks at the top, at the beginning of the luncheon, and then at the end he'll say something as well. Let me tell you about the 3-course meal that's on the menu for this luncheon. First course, seafood stew. Second course, what they're calling a brace of American birds. And the third and final course, apple sponge cake. It'll be complemented by California wines. Anderson Cooper, what do you think about that meal?
Well, they were describing it as sort of Lincoln-inspired. Apparently, Abraham Lincoln enjoyed apples very much, and sort of game meats. So I think they're having some...
Yeah, I could go for a piece of that apple sponge cake myself.
Well, if you're just excited about the possibility of a band performing.
They will also have some gift giving. The president and the vice president will be presented with gifts on behalf of the American people. A framed official photo of the swearing-in ceremony, inscribed, engraved crystal bowls, and then at the end, each guest will receive a crystal vase. John King is watching all of this unfold. John, you've covered a lot of these inaugurations. Dare I say this one has been unique?
It has been unique. Well, if this is 6, I don't know if I should be proud of that fact or if it proves my age here in Washington, but this is a remarkable sight. As Dana was just saying, this is the purest day of our democracy, and there were some partisan lines or some last rebukes of George W. Bush in the inaugural address of Barack Obama, but on this day, they will all be friendly, they will all be polite. The challenges will come after this day. When Barack Obama moves down the avenue after the parade, we will watch after this lunch and starts down his policy agenda. We're beginning to see some cracks, and we will see some fights. But as you see Rahm Emanuel right there signing something, perhaps an autograph, or sitting at the table, he's at the same table as John McCain. He will be the new White House Chief of Staff, one of the most powerful people in Washington. All smiles on this day. The hard work of governing, getting the stimulus plan through the Congress, issuing those orders about Guantanamo Bay, meeting with the commanders and talking about how fast can we get the troops out of Iraq, and can we convince even our friends around the world who are saying they don't want to send more troops to Afghanistan, something Barack Obama wants. So the overseas challenges, the domestic challenges are many, but Wolf, this is a day to celebrate and to reflect, and because of the history, it's extra special, I guess is the easiest way to say it.
Yeah, interesting seating at that table. You see from the right of your screen, that's Rahm Emanuel right in the middle there. His wife Amy is next to him, and Cindy McCain, John McCain, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. A nice mix of a good conversation, I'm sure. And then on the right of your screen, Anderson, we see the former President George W. Bush and Laura Bush. They're now off that U.S. Marine Corps helicopter. They're going to be going inside a hangar for a private ceremony, largely to thank the crews of Air Force One that have flown them around the United States and the world over these past 8 years. and also to celebrate Colonel Tillman, who's retiring.
They're at Andrews Air Force Base, obviously, for that. I was just looking over the mall over our shoulder. It is already emptying out to a large degree. It looks, it's amazing how quickly it's sort of emptied out. Clearly, a lot of people want to try to, I guess, head toward the parade route. They had been told, we had been told that probably was not going to be possible, or was going to be very difficult for people to be able to run from the mall to try to get a view along the parade route. Only about 300 to 350,000 people could actually line the parade route, we were told. Those are the areas that are totally open to the public. There are some ticketed seating for the parade route, but at this point the mall seems pretty empty.
Take your seats. Yeah, it looks like the president is about to enter Statuary Hall for this luncheon.
There's some views along the parade route. You can see security is incredibly intense. There's literally a line of law enforcement personnel, in some cases military personnel, every 3 or 4 feet. There is a law enforcement personnel on both sides of this parade route. This is the largest security event in American history, we are told. They weren't sure how many people would be attending, but they have taken all precautions possible. Snipers on all the rooftops around us and throughout this city. Some 40 or 50 different law enforcement agencies involved, and have been involved really for many days. The train ride down here presented unique security challenges, to say the least, and they certainly continue on this day.
It's a nice mix of bipartisan leadership, Soledad, in this luncheon. Prominent Democrats, prominent Republicans. This is a day where the country seems to forget about politics. It won't last very long, I can assure you.
No, it'll last about a day. That's it.
Yeah. Timothy Geithner, the incoming Secretary of the Treasury, that we just saw, got a little controversy going on, but the betting is he'll probably get confirmed, right, Gloria?
Yeah, the betting is that he will. And Wolf, in fact, this week the Congress is getting ready to mark up in committee the president's stimulus package as well as his tax cuts. Those are, of course, going to be controversial, but Barack Obama has spent an awful lot of time already on the phone with Republicans and with Democrats to garner support for that. In fact, I think when we look back on Barack Obama's first 100 days, we might say that they began on January 2nd. Because, in fact, this legislation, they hope, will be done by President's Day weekend.
Interesting story. Actually, one of the statues in Statuary Hall is of Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy.
Yep.
Clearly just another indication of how far this country has come.
And it's called Statuary Hall for the obvious reason.
Right.
A lot of statues in that hall. I've been in that hall on many occasions. I've just walked around and looked at those statues, and sometimes some old-timers there, they think some of those statues are actually talking to you, and giving you some advice.
There's a whispering gallery in Statuary Hall. If you stand at one side of it, and then you have somebody stand way at the other side, and you whisper to each other, you can actually hear each other. It's good.
Jefferson Davis in there.
I think they will, actually.
They are waiting for Barack Obama. Again, as Wolf said, he's anticipated to speak at the start and again at the finish of this.
They're going to let our cameras stay in there for the open and then the close, but in between, they're going to quietly, politely ask all of the TV crews inside the pool to shut down those cameras. They're going to have a private luncheon, which is, of course, their right. They can have a private luncheon if they want. Barack Obama on this day enjoying every moment, no doubt about that.
David, you were talking about the speech, and just what surprised you? Is it what you anticipated him saying?
Not exactly. It was not as lofty as I had anticipated. Because he went and visited the Lincoln Memorial and looked at that second inaugural and looked at the Gettysburg Address, I had thought maybe he was moving in that direction. I thought rather than speaking to the ages, as Lincoln did, he was speaking to this moment and this generation, that he wanted to appeal and make his case to that generation. So it was very much rooted in the here and now. And the speeches that tend to live on for the ages, as I think his race speech will, tend to have a little more loft to them. But did this speech work for the moment? I think it worked extremely well.
I think it was a very ambitious speech, audacious in the words of Barack Obama, but an ambitious speech because it spoke about remaking America, but it also talked about very big plans in a time of crisis. And he said, you know, what the cynics fail to understand is that the ground has shifted beneath them. And that was the sense that, yes, it's a new generation, and yes, we can do big things, and this crisis gives us the opportunity and say goodbye to the old, stale political arguments that brought us to where we are.
The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, House Republican Leader John Boehner, accompanied by Mr. Pelosi, Mrs. Reid, and Mrs. Boehner.
The leadership has just been introduced, and you know what that means. The President of the United States and the Vice President of the United States are about to be introduced. There's the head table where they will be seated. There's Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and her husband, I guess he's going to be seated right beside her. There he is.
I also am just, I mean, I keep coming back. I'm just amazed that John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, messed up the oath of office. It's an oath which is written into the Constitution.
That's a lot of pressure, a lot of pressure.
Jeff, those words are written in the Constitution, and I guess, I'm just guessing, hold on a second, hold on.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden Jr. and Dr. Biden, escorted by Senator and Mrs. Bennett.
Joe Biden is really a creature of the United States Congress. He's been in the Senate for more than 3 decades, so he's very, very familiar.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, Barack H. Obama, and Mrs. Obama, escorted by Senator Feinstein and Mr. Blau.
Wow. Hail to the chief, the commander-in-chief, the President of the United States, Barack Obama. He's about to have lunch with 200 guests in Statuary Hall on Capitol Hill. Can only imagine, Anderson, what must be going through his mind and Michelle Obama's mind.
And the mind of John McCain, who Barack Obama just said, President Obama just said hello to, and Sidney McCain there. There you also see Rahm Emanuel, former Vice President Al Gore and his wife. Michelle Obama's brother.
He's a basketball coach, and a good one indeed.
Mother-in-law, Tim Geithner, chose to be Treasury Secretary.
Tim Geithner very close by.
He's going to have a big job, assuming he's confirmed.
They have a lot of confidence he's going to be confirmed.
Good half of that inaugural address was devoted to the U.S. economy.
Justice Roberts there on the left, Justice Breyer on the right. I wonder if President Obama said to him, don't worry about messing up the...
He probably said, don't worry, stuff happens. There's our mayor, Adrian Fenty, right in the front of your screen. The mayor of Washington, D.C. He's a very popular young mayor here in the nation's capital.
Senator Orrin Hatch, of course.
He was supporting Timothy.
I believe that's Vice President Biden's mother.
Yep, she's in her 90s. Yep.
It's his brother.
There you see Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg in the background. Chris Dodd, who would have liked to have been in this position.
He ran for the Democratic presidential nomination. Didn't exactly work out.
Dropped out after Iowa.
Actually, one of his close aides, Valerie Jarrett. I believe that's Valerie Jarrett. Yeah, I think it was, yeah.
Some new faces in Washington in this crowd, some old faces in new positions as well.
I remember this luncheon is being hosted by the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, and the Senator from California, Dianne Feinstein, is the chair of that committee. Robert Byrd, the senator from West Virginia, is there, and everybody is just thrilled that Senator Ted Kennedy and his wife are there as well. All right, let's hear what Barack Obama, he's supposed to speak right at the beginning, not extensively, just a few words. And I'm interested, I'm sure, as all of you are, to hear what he says. So we'll listen in.
Holding this inaugural luncheon began in 1953, actually, when President Eisenhower, Vice President Nixon, and 50 guests dined on cream chicken, baked ham, and potato puffs. Our menu, we think, is a bit more exciting. And believe it or not, the recipe page has been the most visited part of the inaugural website. So we are very honored today to be hosted in Statuary Hall, which served as the House chamber when Abraham Lincoln was a member of Congress. As president, he participated in the public inauguration ceremonies at the Capitol, even during the darkest days of the Civil War. As we approach the bicentennial of his birth, we honor his determination that those who have sacrificed for our country shall not have died in vain, and that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. President Lincoln is also the inspiration for the painting we have chosen today. And this is the view of Yosemite Valley, of course, which happens to be in California, by Thomas Hill, strange, a 19th century painter that I very much love. It's on loan from the New York Historical Society, so it kind of binds New York and California. As the country struggled to emerge from the turmoil of the Civil War, many Americans looked west for the dawn of a new era. In tune with his times, President Lincoln signed the Yosemite land grant in order to protect the majestic wild beauty of the area. Thomas Hill painted the grandeur and the beauty of the American West that captured America's essence, our land of opportunity, optimism, and freedom. It is now my privilege to ask Dr. Barry Black, the chaplain.
All right, they're about to kick us out of the Statuary Hall of the U.S. and the U.S. Congress, where this luncheon is going to be private for the 200 guests. I want to stay up on Capitol Hill, though. We have a very special guest right now, former Secretary of State, the former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Colin Powell, is joining us. General Powell, I know you came in and endorsed Barack Obama. How excited are you by what our country has gone through on this day?
I'm enormously excited, Wolf, and I think the whole country is excited. This is such a momentous occasion for all of us. A new generation taking over, a new president coming in, a solid team coming in with him, and he happens to be African American. You can't ignore that fact, particularly the day after the holiday that celebrated the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. So all of us were deeply touched at the speech that he gave, at the very act of him taking the oath of office, and looking where I was up on the stand, looking down the length of the mall at 1 million or 2 million people. It was a deeply moving experience, and I think the whole country is going to be touched by it. And now the difficult work begins tomorrow, and we now need to come together as a nation and help our new president.
Did you ever think, General Powell, that you would be alive to witness this day?
I didn't know if I would not. I knew the day would come eventually. I watched over the last 50 years, the 50 years of my adult life, as my country went from Jim Crow and discrimination and segregation, and I couldn't get a hamburger in a hamburger joint in the South. And slowly but surely, things changed, things improved. America looked at itself with Dr. Martin Luther King holding the mirror up for us to look at ourselves, and we said, this is not who we should be or what we should be. This is not the inspiration to the world that we present ourselves as. And so slowly but surely we changed. And then in recent years, more rapidly, to the point where a man of enormous skill, enormous capability, was elected President of the United States, and not just because he is black, but it's a sign of our society and our democratic system that he is black and he made it. A lot of people said white folks would go into the booth, but they wouldn't pull the lever for him, no matter what they said outside. Well, they did. And he ran a brilliant campaign, an organized campaign, and it was a very successful campaign. And Wolf, let me just say how touched I am the way in which he has reached out to the other side, if I may call it that. The very act of having a dinner in honor of John McCain last night, and for John McCain, acceptance of that invitation showed that President Obama intends to reach out to all Americans, cross all racial, ethnic, social, and economic lines, and bring this country together in a unifying effort.
Secretary Powell, he did deliver a strong message to friend and foe alike in his inaugural address. I wonder what you thought about that.
I think it was a very powerful statement, and I think it was a proper statement. We do have foes out there, and they should be on notice that America will deal with them. We will fight for our interests, and we'll fight for the interests of our friends. But I think he also made it clear that his preference is to find peaceful ways to talk to people and to work with our friends and allies. But America will defend its interests, and I think it was most appropriate for him to say that so that there is no mistake on the part of any of our potential foes.
Are you going to be there for him if he calls you, General Powell, and he says, you know, Colin, I need your help. I want you to do something. What are you going to say to the Commander-in-Chief?
What would you like me to do, Mr. President? And I would consider anything that a president would ask me to do. I've tried in the course of my career, when consulted by a president or a senior official in government, to give my advice, and if I can, to provide my assistance.
He's been saluting a Commander-in-Chief almost his entire life. He'll continue to do so right now. General Powell, thank you so much for spending a few moments with us on this historic day. I know how significant and meaningful it is to you and to our viewers, not only in the United States and around the world. We'll talk down the road. Appreciate it very much, and good luck.
Thank you, Wolf.
General Colin Powell, the former Secretary of State, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he in his own right broke many barriers, reaching the level, the areas that he did. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to show you the parade route down Pennsylvania Avenue, what's about to happen, because this day is by no means over. There is a new president of the United States, a new vice president of the United States. They're about to make the journey right after that luncheon on Capitol Hill over to the White House, and they're going to go down Pennsylvania Avenue, and people are gathering to watch what's going to be an enormous and excellent parade. Our coverage of the inauguration of Barack Obama will continue after this.
Come on, everybody. We can do it. Join the grassroots movement. Let's all join together, every woman and man. Lend a hand all across the land. Join in, let's begin, start right away. Together moving forward toward a brighter day. We have the tools and the skills, and we're capable to change the world and make it more sustainable. Together we are strong and our bonds are unbreakable. If we act bold, we can attain the goal. Let's have the courage so we can be a service. Planting seeds when they flourish, everybody will be nourished. Together we are better, nothing to it but to do it. It's a grassroots movement. Let's all join together, every woman and man. Hand all across the land. Right away, together moving forward toward a brighter day. A brighter day.
You give them your money. You trust them. But what if they used it for something else?
Anyone that moves against this bank has ended up dead or disappeared.
On February 13th,
They control everything.
is your money
Send a message.
making a killing?
If they can't get to you, they'll get to your family.
This isn't over.
Clive Owen, Naomi Watts.
There has to be a way to bring down this bank.
International. Rated R. In theaters February 13th.
One of the factors impacting energy prices is growing global demand. And one way to put downward pressure on prices is to make more supply available. ExxonMobil has invented a breakthrough technology that we've just begun using here in the U.S. to access cleaner burning natural gas that's locked in very tight, hard rocks. We could produce enough gas from one U.S. source alone to heat 50 million homes for almost a decade.
Now, history comes in your size. Get your CNN.com inauguration t-shirt today at cnn.com/t-shirt.
Sunday. Strong, silent, fearless over war zones, tough under pressure. This is Air Force One. Now, Nat Geo gains unprecedented access to Air Force One and the top secret mission that risked everything.
I remember us going completely black.
On board Air Force One premieres Sunday at 8, only on National Geographic, Channel 162.
With British Airways, enjoy our complimentary 3-course meals, cinema, even pretzels, and now hotel rooms. That's right, we're giving away 2 nights in London for free when you fly to London. British Airways flights start at $156 each way with a round-trip purchase from New York. Great fares also available from 17 other US cities. Offer ends January 29th. So hurry, book now at BA.com.
State of the Union with John King. CNN Sunday, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern.
All right, they're behind closed doors on Capitol Hill right now at this luncheon in Statuary Hall. The President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, and about 200 invited guests, including the top congressional leadership, among others. And then shortly thereafter, Anderson, they're going to walk out the U.S. Capitol, get into that motorcade, and they're going to make that trek down Pennsylvania Avenue, see security, law enforcement getting ready. The drive from Capitol Hill to the White House for this really traditional enormous parade, and there are going to be floats and marching bands coming in from all over the country.
The parade is supposed to start at around 3:35 Eastern time. The crowds are still sort of sparse along the parade route, but it is very difficult trying to get around. Don Lemon, CNN's Don Lemon, has been trying to move around out there. You've been seeing how hard it is. What's it like trying to get through? There's a lot of places you simply can't get through.
Yeah, you can't get through. It's very difficult. There are people standing around in bars and hotel lobbies watching the speech because they can't get in. 100 deep in those checkpoints along 10th, 11th, 12th Streets, and you simply cannot get through. They're obviously checking everyone, but I don't know, Anderson, what the crowd estimates are, but I think it's going to be a lot higher because there are people still waiting 3-4 hours to get into the venue.
It's actually very frustrating. I was stuck in a crowd for about 20 or so minutes, and just there's really no information. So everyone is kind of asking each other, but no one really knows where to go or what to do. And if they see somebody walking with purpose, they tend to follow that person.
And in addition to that, since there's no information in a group that's now stuck between borders, you know, that when they sort of crowd them in, you know, people are going 2 different directions. Some people said, no, I'm going to the mall. And other people said, oh, I'm waiting for the parade. And I thought, neither of you are going to get where you need to go.
Well, and now you have directions shifting, right? People leaving the Capitol to try and get somewhere else.
And if you're on one side of Pennsylvania Avenue, you are stuck there until this is all over. So, and if you're on the side that's not near the mall, you can't get to that side because that's where the checkpoints are. And if you're lucky enough to get on the other side of the mall, then you're stuck there for who knows how long.
Elaine Quijano is along the parade route. Let's check in with her. Elaine, what's the scene where you are?
Well, Anderson, that's exactly right. If you are on one side of Pennsylvania Avenue, you can just about forget trying to get across. But that has been the case since early this morning. I know I can tell you from personal experience, but keep in mind, as you look at the broad expanse here down Pennsylvania Avenue, even though the crowd might look thin in some parts, that's not necessarily reflective of the number of people who actually wanted to be here, because I can tell you just beyond camera range, beyond the security checkpoints here, I am seeing a sea of people on some of the side streets that go off of Pennsylvania Avenue here. So just because you're not seeing massive crowds lining the route here does not mean they have not come. But one of the people who did come is joining me down here. I noticed you, Carmelita Spain, because you and a group of, I guess now your best friends were dancing earlier, even though you say you were here since 3:30 in the morning trying to get in. Tell me about that.
Yes, well, we wanted to make sure that we were able to get in and to share this happy, blessed event. And so coming at that time, we wanted to make sure we had good seats, of course.
But has it been worth it? Because unlike the mall, there are no jumbotrons here. There is literally nothing to see at this point unless we've got the motorcades going by. But for the most part, you're just hearing what's broadcast over the loudspeakers here and not really seeing anything. Has it been worth it?
It's been worth it because we've been in the midst of the history being in the making. We've been joining forces, and it doesn't matter of what race, creed, or color, that we all have united here to witness the inauguration of the first African American to become president. So yes, it was totally worth it for us to be here, because I tell you, just as President now, Barack Obama, has stated, the whole thing is for us to unite and be one, and that is the whole purpose of why we all came here.
All right, Carmelita Spain, thank you so much. So a message of inclusiveness really resonating here in Freedom Plaza, so named because Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr., actually wrote part of his I Dream as I'm sorry, he wrote part of his I Have a Dream speech nearby at the Willard Hotel. Pardon me, it's been a long morning so far, Wolf, but certainly despite the brain freeze here, a lot of people very enthusiastic and certainly anticipating that moment when they see now President Obama's motorcade coming down Pennsylvania Avenue. Wolf?
It's not just brain freeze, it's really lip freeze more than anything when you're standing
Although
out
it's
there.
pretty balmy up here in Anderson where we are.
Balmy up here when you're standing down there for hours at a time, as I can tell you. And
I don't
Soledad
blame
can attest from last night on the mall.
Chilly.
Your mouth gets pretty good.
Let me tell our viewers to get excited, because pretty soon you're going to see two remarkable pieces of technology that only you'll see here on CNN. We had a satellite reconnaissance, a space photo taken of the mall at the moment just before Barack Obama became the president of the United States. There was some cloud cover, but we're told by the satellite experts that picture, Anderson, is going to be very, very cool.
Did we have a correspondent in
We had
space,
no
or
correspondent, but we had a camera up on this satellite. That's very cool. Also, we've been telling you about that photo synth, that remarkable moment where we invited viewers who were nearby to snap a picture of Barack Obama as he took the oath of office. We're now getting that together for a three-dimensional, unique, very unique vantage point of what happened, that historic moment. Much more of our coverage, including from the parade route, and a lot more when the inauguration of Barack Obama continues.
Coverage of the inauguration of Barack Obama is sponsored by Cisco, a primary provider of the network technology for CNN's news coverage, and by Vestas, #1 in modern energy. Go to CNN.com/44th President to watch highlights from the day's events and send in iReports to share your thoughts on this historic inauguration.
Let's go!
Telepresence, bringing people and countries a little closer. That's the Human Network Effect. Cisco, welcome to the Human Network.
Think the United States has few undiscovered natural resources? Think wind power is capable of turning into energy all by itself? Vestas has over 3 decades of knowledge, experience, and technology in harnessing the raw power of the wind and turning it into clean, predictable, modern energy. Nobody knows how to harness the power of the wind like Vestas.
Anheuser-Busch is one of the largest recyclers of aluminum cans, over 27 billion cans a year. And those recycled cans can come back pretty much as anything. But the lucky ones get to relive the dream.
A new administration
administration takes over, and CNN keeps them honest. The best political team on television asks the tough questions. Track the first 100 days.
With all this modern technology stuff, it's always your network this, your network that. But you know what? It's true. The fiber optic Optimum network is why Optimum Online is up to 5 times faster than phone company high-speed internet. The Optimum network is why IOTV has such stunning picture quality. And why Optimum Voice delivers such unbeatable reliability. If you want the best quality services for your money, it really is all about your network. The Optimum network.
Want a leather jacket? Go to Zulu. Starting at only $99 at Zulu. We have the largest selection of bomber jackets, pea coats, racing styles, and three-quarter jackets. Hundreds to choose from for only $99 at Zulu. Want a leather jacket? Go to Zulu. You won't find this quality or selection at these prices anywhere else. With sizes up to 5X for only $99 at Zulu. Want a leather jacket? Go to Zulu.
Just $99.
Follow that O'Brien Investigates. Black in America 2 Solutions. CNN this July.